This at least has the scores for that. Cool. We're live. Episode 149. Let's check the volume. Sounds good on Twitch. Volume sounds good on the tube. Live episode 149 of the Ego Chall Podcast, giving our instant reaction to one of the greatest grand finals in Call of Duty history. Bang. I was watching the Scum Watch Party. I didn't even think to look at the viewers. It should be, yeah. They probably didn't, and I was gonna put down. They tweeted the bracket before the grand finals ended, and I was gonna copy it because I just remembered last year they didn't update it ever, like after the. I have the updated points in the doc from Chrome. Final bracket, no finals, but we obviously know the finals is what it is. Oh, damn, that's sick. I gotta put that in here. Simpin and Beezy 12-time champs, selling him at 10. All right, I think I'm good.
Hello and welcome to episode 149 of the Ego Chall Podcast. My name is Preston Byers, and as always, I'm joined by my co-host Justin Binkowski. And on today's episode, we're talking about the first major of the 2025 Call of Duty League season, which some, including my co-host, think might be the best, at least grand finals. Some people might say it's one of the best tournaments in Call of Duty League and maybe COD esports history. But we have a lot to break down today. Before we get to any of that, how you doing, Bink?
Yeah, doing well. Long weekend of some awesome Call of Duty. This is probably the quickest we've done a podcast after the end of /major. So, I think you're gonna get some good insight, hopefully, in terms of the matches because they're fresh on the mind. And like Preston kind of alluded to, I think definitely up there, and especially in the CDL era, is one of the craziest and most entertaining tournaments and finals we've had in the CDL era. So a lot to talk about. Should be a good one. Hope you guys enjoy.
Yeah, the last 4 days, the 12 CDL teams have been battling it out in Madrid, Spain, the first European CDL event in nearly 5 years. And I think it lived up to the hype. You can debate about the crowd or whatever, but in terms of gameplay, it was one of the more exciting tournaments that you're ever going to see. And a lot of it came down to the top teams, some of them, I'll say, really performed up to the standard and were so evenly matched, including the top two. and then you had the hometown favorites, the home country favorites. They had the run of a lifetime basically through this tournament, and there were just so many storylines and a lot of things that we have to talk about. Probably it will take us more than just an episode to kind of get through all of that. But we have to start at the very, very top, as we usually do when we talk about these majors. Atlanta FaZe and Los Angeles Thieves, they play each other twice in this tournament. They play each other in the winners finals, and they play each other in the grand finals. They go to the very last map of each series and the very last round of the very last map in each series. The first in the winners finals, a Game 5 round 11 reverse sweep by Atlanta FaZe, and then in the grand finals, a Game 7 round 11 win for Atlanta FaZe. FaZe, who you picked to win this major, they're back. I don't know any other way to say it. They beat LAT twice. Doesn't matter by how much, but they did it. They proved to be the best team again, at least for the moment. Overall thoughts on Atlanta FaZe kind of comeback after a really poor start to this season?
Yeah, I believe I don't know the exact number, and because I can't remember when, um, the interviewer slash host mentioned it. He said like had won 11 matches in a row, but I can't remember if it was today after um the winners finals or if it was yesterday after their match to get to the winners finals. So they're on a double digit straight series win streak right now, counting the minor.
Mm-hmm.
Um, Especially after the struggles, as you mentioned early in the year. Uh, this is what people expected from FaZe, and they have turned things around since that early start. I know we had even had to talk about it over the holiday break and stuff, like just even the notion of people questioning whether they would have to make a roster change or not. Like there was never any serious rumors or discussions about it, but we had to at least just discuss the idea of it being a possibility if they continue to struggle. Now that's just completely out the window. Like you don't have to worry about it. Like they showed what they're capable of, and they're capable of lifting trophies and beating the quote unquote super team that was put together to, win multiple championships this year. Um, Although, LAT, for what it's worth, they had their own little skid and it came at a different time to Atlanta's, but you picked LAT to win this whole thing, and they showed what they're capable of too. And um, obviously we talk a lot about S&D and round 11s on the Ego Chall podcast and stuff. And if I mean if either of those round 11s, but especially obviously the last one, go the other way, the tone's completely different. And we're talking about LAT super team doing what they were paid to do, and doing what they were signed to do, and lifting the first trophy of the year, and how many more are they going to win this year, yada yada. So like that's how close these series were today, is literally 2 rounds of S&D away from a completely different major talking point, right? So um honestly, it was an incredible showdown, both matchups. um we're gonna I know I'm gonna talk a ton about it, so I'm trying to talk in generals first before we dive right in. um but just for Atlanta in general, I think that's the biggest point to drive home. Really, is like, they're here. They've won a ton of series in a row now. They are the top dogs again, and it's going to be interesting to see who attempts to knock them off their throne. Heading into um, today, actually, I was kind of like thinking about it in the back of my head. This was a little reminiscent of Toronto's run at Major One last year. FaZe was 6-0 in map count heading into today, and I was thinking, oh, we're gonna have like this conversation of potentially Atlanta like not losing a map, or I think Toronto last year didn't lose a hard point or a search at Major One. They only lost a control, something like that. And I was like, oh, this is kind of crazy that this might be the case. Obviously, it didn't turn out exactly like that, but um, just the vague similarity was there in the back of my mind. And um I just think in general, this was really a strong showing. And again, like for LAT, came close. And when you lose only 2 series in a tournament and both series are to the champion, that's the other similarity for me. Because Atlanta was in that position Major One last year, right? They lost both series at Major One to Toronto, I believe. And Toronto was the eventual Major One champion. So like, they've been in that position that LAT is in before, and obviously they responded by winning championships and stuff. So, gonna be interesting to see where they go from here. But I definitely think for LA Thieves too, just in general, like you know what this squad is capable of. Um, one thing I think I'll talk a little bit more about in depth too is really Envoy. Envoy really stood out for me for LA Thieves in general this weekend and today in particular, and I think that was like potentially a like I didn't believe it like a quote unquote weak point or like just something people would look at for this roster, potential scapegoat if the roster didn't work out. And we talked about like his statistical struggles last year and all that yada yada, but he played incredible today. So shout out Envoy, even though they didn't get the dub. Obviously shout out all the guys on all these teams for putting on a great show today. I already yapped enough though, and I haven't even talked too specific yet, so I'm gonna take a little break, let you take over.
To what you said about the win streak that FaZe has been on, so now they have won 12 consecutive matches, including the minor where they won 4. So if you're just looking at in the official like major cycle and stuff, they've won 8 matches after starting the season off with a 3-match losing streak. The comeback has been pretty incredible, and the way they've done it, I think, is even better because they beat LAT at the minor. LAT obviously gets knocked out in their first match in that minor, and then they obviously have to beat LAT twice during this tournament. They also beat the Toronto Ultra in this tournament, and like along the way they beaten the Boston Breach. The Breach to this point, at least before this weekend, they really had been super competitive with every single team except FaZe, and FaZe in back-to-back matches with them beat them 3-0. And I think that says a lot, even, like not as much nearly as beating LAT in Toronto, but like a team that has been right there with every other team that they played, and FaZe just looked so much better than them. This is the FaZe I think we were all kind of waiting to see. The talent was there. We knew at certain points last season we saw it come to fruition, and they were able to win a championship, and then it just tailed off at the very end. And there were all the questions about whether they should make a roster change at that point. Of course, they don't. They go to ESWC, they win that, and then you say, okay, you won this. It's obviously not a CDL event, but it's a big money event. It's certainly somewhat prestigious in that sense, where you're winning, $1.5, $2 million or whatever it is, and then they come into this season and they start off so slowly. Like I want to take it back to the very first 3 matches. They lose to Toronto, they lose to LAT, and they lose to Carolina. Granted, those 3 teams looked like for the better part of 2 months 3 of the best teams in the CDL. But then they start to kind of pick up wins. I think they got the ball rolling with Vegas. They beat them in their first for their first win this season. So shout out Vegas, helping FaZe get started. And then it just started, piling on at that. The minor was, I don't know if what they would say if that minor helped them kind of get their groove or just iron out things. Obviously, that was the first, moment that we got to see them back in action after that break, and we had such like a bad memory of them basically throughout that entire holiday break. And then they come back immediately. They beat Miami, they beat LAT, they beat Minnesota, which was a very tough matchup for them, and then they beat Carolina in the grand finals, and they were pretty dominant over the last week or so. So I mean, it's kind of incredible. It's it's always the case with FaZe. Anytime that we doubt them or even just like start to talk about like maybe this could happen, maybe a roster change, it always seems like an improvement in their performance is coming immediately. And it happened, I think, a little bit last season, like coming into the year, and it happened now where they've won 12 in a row. and that is nothing to sneeze at. And the quality of competition that they beat to do that is pretty incredible. Let's go into the grand finals, obviously, because that is, I think you said it was possibly the greatest grand finals in Call of Duty history before we went on the show, and I mean, it's hard to argue. Taking it back to before the show, you brought up like the Minnesota Miracle, and obviously in terms of like a shock factor and just like the utter surprise of that, I think that one is like not the best, but certainly one of the most memorable, and certainly one of the best. But if you're looking at the talent and the level of skill that's involved, and just the history, obviously between these two teams and some of these players, like this is a draws a scrappy matchup, and we got two of them. We got what 12 maps between these two teams this weekend, or today alone. So why do you think this is the best grand finals, and if so, why?
Yeah, so I think it's definitely worth a conversation around it. I do think, if we break it down in the CDL era, I would probably say this is the best grand finals to date. I do think though that is the Minnesota Miracle, which I forget what we called it, but we said like the Minnesota Miracle wasn't a great uh name for it. We came up with something that was
I
a
don't
little better,
remember.
I think.
I
I know we did. I can't think of it either off the top of my head. But regardless, Minnesota's reverse sweep over Toronto back at Major 1 2021. Um, that's got to be up there in consideration. I think some of the uh, arguments for it to be over this one today is just the fact it was that, a 4-0 reverse sweep. The fact that it was a best of 9, today was a best of 7, so they had to win 5 maps versus, FaZe only winning 4 today. Also, just the fact due to the way the, best of 7 and best of 9 worked out, I mean, I have it here. Um, yeah, so Minnesota had to win a hard point to pull off that reverse sweep in the best of 9, whereas Atlanta won the grand finals today without winning a hard point. So you can definitely, make some counter arguments to today's grand finals being the best. Outside of the CDL era, some of the ones that immediately come to mind for me was the first time Cole Complexity beat Farico Impact in Black Ops 2. That was like an incredible moment. Like people,
I think that was Anaheim.
that was kind of like FaZe before, before FaZe today is like the villain. Like people started to think of Farico as the villains just because they were winning.
Yeah, Parasite
so many
was like
tournaments
Draza, basically.
And like Cole like dethroned them and everyone was going nuts and was super happy about it. And then, in a shocking twist of fate, Aches eventually becomes the villain and, a full circle moment there. But that's one grand finals outside of CDL that comes to mind. The other one would be, I believe it was at X Games in Ghosts, where it was like OpTic against Team Caliber, and there was like the Sovereign Dom where Clay gets the final kill on Neslo with a Bulldog shotgun. I remember that, but that's obviously just like OpTic in nade shot winning a tournament. So like that's another grand finals that comes to mind. And there's other ones if I thought hard enough about it, I could probably come up with some other ones outside of the CDL too. But I think in general today, just like you said, from a pure talent perspective and the end result being literally last map, last round, it's really hard to beat that. And the fact that you're like able to, we do have a CDL best of 9 reverse sweep as like a contender. I think that's, if you tell me you go with that as number 1 and today's number 2, I'm not gonna be overly mad about it or anything like that. So end of the day, I think today's, in my eyes, it's the best so far. Who knows? Maybe we have some more this year that live up to the hype too, and then we have a very interesting conversation about the best grand finals this year or all time, right? But for now, I'm gonna go with it. It is number one. If you don't want to put it somewhere else, that's fine with me. But just the fact that, in the moment right now, less than an hour after it happened, like the fact that this finals is already in the conversation, in my eyes at least, I feel like the community will, at least start to have that conversation as more people are uh, interacting and talking about what happened today. Just the fact that it's already potentially in that conversation speaks volumes to the action we saw today.
Yeah, I was actually trying to think of grand finals that I can remember while you were talking. Like the only one off the top of my head that, and you mentioned some good ones, but I remember. But obviously, it was my first event watching. But Champs 2013 Envy versus Freako Impact, and I believe it. I'm almost positive it was a best of 11. I think it went to a game 11, and it was
I did. You're right. Yes.
Meltdown S&D,
Yep.
and just so from
that was a continuation series.
yeah,
I believe.
I believe so as well. I think Impact had won like the winners finals against Envy, but just in general having literally going down to the last map, and I think it was Killa got the last kill. It was like Meltdown S&D, and he I think he killed like JCap like trying to defuse the bomb or something or plant the bomb. But
I can picture it. Yeah.
but like in terms of just like obviously this is a little bit different, but the historical significance of that particular grand finals is also pretty great because that was the first champs, and like not counting COD XP, and the start of really like the coronation of Freako Impact, and like that kind of leads into what happened at Anaheim later that year, where Impact is like the villain. They're the villains of COD esports at that point. They're the bad boys of COD esports, and Complexity has to kind of dethrone them. I feel like just in general, because that's like this particular grand final I was talking about, the major one, it's not going to have the historical significance, but like we got to see two of the most talented Call of Duty esports teams of all time. I don't think that's a debate. We've talked about it on previous shows. Like these two teams are completely stacked, and they're basically all-star teams. And the fact that they got to play each other not once but twice today and go to round 11s in the last map of each series, I think that's pretty significant. I can't think of another instance of that happening like ever, at least like in a major kind of event. I'm sure it's happened at like maybe like UGC Niagara or something, like one of those smaller kind of side events. But I mean, it's pretty incredible. The rivalry, obviously, just the level of play is pretty crazy, and it really does set us up, hopefully, for a very entertaining rest of the season. Because I mean, if this was the first major, you're hoping that this is going to happen, to a similar degree at least 3 more times plus champs, and I think it really gives us like a better idea of what to expect as we move in. Because I was kind of I don't know exactly the word, like I just didn't know what to expect at all going into that Christmas break, because we had never really dealt with a FaZe that looked as vulnerable and distracted as that FaZe did before Christmas. And LAT at that point looked unstoppable. They looked like the best team, and here we are basically a month and a half later, and things have changed in a big way. FaZe is now the top dog definitively, at least for the moment, because this happens every year where whoever wins Major 1, they are the best team until they're not. And FaZe has to kind of defend their crown or defend the throne now, and I'm sure LAT feels that way. They're going to be really they're going to really want this as bad as anybody. And then there's going to be other teams like OpTic, who we will talk about certainly. They have a lot to prove now too, and not in the same way that FaZe and LAT do, and Toronto as well. They're going to be some teams really that really going to have to learn some things from this major. Before we dive any further into matches, the crowd was the subject of hype and anticipation, I guess, and we had briefly talked about it on the last podcast, and you were a little skeptical, I think, of the impact or just the in general the hype, whether it will meet reality or whatever. What did you think of the crowd? Did you think that it was better, worse? What was your kind of rating of the Madrid crowd at Major One?
I'll say, I think the players, for the most part, obviously there were FU draws a chance, so like do with
Worldwide.
that what you will. Uh, so I don't know how much draws have particularly enjoyed those specific chants. But from like the post game interviews and stuff, it definitely seemed like the players were enjoying the atmosphere there. Um, not to be super negative or bring up stuff unnecessarily, but um, I did think it was the interviewer or host was definitely for me very difficult to understand, and there were several players in the post match interviews who were having a tough time understanding, and obviously it can be a factor of his thick accent slash assuming English wasn't his first language. Um, and that plus like the crowd noise like making it difficult for them to hear anybody talking, let alone somebody with a strong accent or whatnot. I thought that was tough at times. There was even at one point after one LAT win, they were doing an interview with Hydra, and English isn't Hydra's first language, and he's talking to someone else who English isn't their first language with the crowd in the background. It was very tough for them. We did to play devil's advocate though. There was a really wholesome interview. We can talk more about it when we get to Miami, but Rancor, I believe it was after their win yesterday, um, was kind of a little emotional and almost brought to tears. It seemed like trying to do the interview in English at first, and then the interviewer again, because of where it was able to interview him in Spanish and then translate after the fact. So pros and cons to that particular situation. But I did think, in particular, the Gentlemates fans or the French fans who showed up, even though Gentlemates team only played in one series, like uh they seemed to be super hype, and they were supporting Hydra again, another French player, throughout his run. And there was a clip I saw on Twitter, I don't think I put it in the notes, of like after LAG mates lost, like the fans like met them. It was like a big circle, and the players walked out into it, and they were still cheering, even though they literally got a last place finish at this event. So I thought that was pretty cool. I think for the most part, a lot of people seem to enjoy the crowd, so I don't have to harp on my personal views on it too much. Um, if that's the crowd and people think there is a very stark difference between what we saw in the stands this weekend as opposed to a North American event, that's up to them. I'll leave it to that.
And then there's LAT. I think unless you have anything else on FaZe in particular, anything you want to talk about before we kind of move on to LAT?
I just want to go over the two matches really,
Yeah,
and then I
sure.
guess we can talk about LAT if there's anything more to say, or FaZe for that matter.
The one thing I just wanted to kind of ask about it was, is there anything that LAT could have done, differently? Like it felt like this isn't something like the Thieves just gave this away necessarily. It felt like these are just two teams that are so evenly matched that it's almost a coin flip of, like you said, it's if two rounds go differently, the Thieves have now won Major One, and the conversation around them is probably a lot different. And especially with how Nadeshot and their fan base has been recently, kind of like if you're not first, you're last, like Ricky Bobby. This, I don't know. Was there anything that you saw during these two matches that you're like, LAT kind of missed the boat right there?
Um, so I again, I don't want to, you know, say that one thing in particular is the reason, especially in a series that's so close as these two series. One thing I will say, I was watching a lot of the Scump watch party this weekend, so shout out the boys over there. I was needing the little extra encouragement to stay awake for some of these early matches, and then they provided some good entertainment. So shout out to Scump Methods and those guys. Um, But one thing they noted in particular during the winners bracket finals on Vault S&D, which was the game 5, almost everybody in Vault S&D is going to that underground bomb site, the A bomb site in the actual vault. And there was one offense where LAT tried to make a push to B on the outer street. And if it wasn't like 4-0 in kills, it was maybe 4-1. It was a slaughter, and it wasn't like, you know, instant just FaZe killed him 4-0, but it was like a convincing round for FaZe. And even like it was an offense for LAT, and offense seems to be favored on this map because of that A bomb site in the vault. And they noted like, oh, FaZe is going A this next site. They're not doing what LAT just did and going B. Like they're going A. So I think that was in the 3-3 round, if I'm not mistaken. And then FaZe made that push and went up 5-3 maybe. I don't really remember. But I know that was just one thing that was mentioned on the watch party. So, but again, that's really, splitting hairs, especially in a map where, or in a series where the, game 4 hardpoint was 12 points and LAT looked like they could have been in a position to close that out. That the control was 3-2. The only map that really wasn't close in the series was the map 1, actually, where LAT almost 100-point clubbed FaZe on a red card hard point. So that's the winners final in terms of like, again, I don't think there's one particular moment when you have 2 series that come down to the last round. It's really hard to say. And even in that game 5, round 11 in the winners finals, a BZ team nated Draza, and almost simultaneously Ghosty killed himself with a grenade. They never showed the Ghosty clip, but Abizi it bounced off the building in front of them. They were trying to throw pre-nades over the middle building, and it bounced back and just hit Draza right in the feet and blew up on him. And I was kind of confused because I obviously haven't played a ton of competitive in this game, but in some titles with like the ricochet team damage and stuff, like Abizi would have killed himself because he quote unquote did damage to a teammate so early in the round. So I was kind of surprised by that. But yeah, so like there are tons of things that if they go the other way, we're talking different about the winners finals, let alone the grand finals. But in that grand finals, there was a reset in the map 2 red card search and destroy. FaZe were up 3-1. LAT won 2 straight rounds, and they were about to win to go up 4-3. And I think it was Scrap killed Draza standing in spawn, and like Miles and Chance were like, oh, Draza must have been calling in an RC car because he was just standing there not moving, and it turns out Draza disconnected. So they ended up, because he was literally in spawn, he had to have DC'd very early in the round. They ended up fully replaying that round 7, so it could have been 4-3 LAT, but Atlanta wins that round 7 after the reset, and then they win a 2v4 in the following round to go up 5-3, and that was that was kind of a significant momentum swing in my eyes, because LAT had already made a wild comeback in the Hacienda Hardpoint map 1 of the grand finals, and if that reset doesn't happen, they're up 4-3. The 2v4 doesn't happen, they go up 5-3. Like, we're potentially looking at a 2-0 lead for LAT, and obviously FaZe did reverse sweep them in the other series, so I'm not going to say like if LAT went up 2-0, they're winning the whole thing, because obviously you can't say that with the reverse sweep. But that could have been a pretty significant, momentum swing if things went differently. And even in the Hacienda control, that was played in both the winter series and the grand finals. And in the winners bracket finals, it was 3-2, and all 5 rounds went to offense, I believe. In the grand finals, the first 4 rounds were won by defense, and then Atlanta won an offense in round 5. So even Methods kind of was, I think he was kind of joking, but he might have been kind of serious. He's like, you can make the argument that Hacienda is the most balanced control map if we're seeing like the top teams literally in one instance all winning offenses and the other instance almost winning all defenses. So I thought that was an interesting point. We can potentially dive into it another point. But yeah, and then I'm sure if I went through that Skyline S&D, there was the one round where Draza almost got like a 4-piece in the other bomb site, like up the zip line in that little room. That's the second hard point. Um, I went back and looked at that. Maybe, LAT does something different that round and things go a little differently. But either way, like I'm obviously nitpicking a little bit, just even bringing up these instances, but that's just kind of like, especially when it's just a game 7 round 11, game 5 round 11, like if any of those little things go differently, the whole picture of this tournament could have turned out differently. And I think that's at least, interesting to some degree.
Yeah, and it's pretty cool to see these two teams because of the history that they have, and Draza and Scrap, they no love lost. I think is the right term for that. Even after the grand finals, they go bump fists and everything, and those guys do not bump fists. Everybody else does. Everybody else is cool, and I don't know. I can't read lips exactly, but I think Draza was antagonizing him a little bit, and there was a little altercation, if you want to call it that, between the two. They go face to face. They have to actually be separated by the other players and some of the coaches, which is like literally never happens in Call of Duty except like Nade Shot Nakes and like and that was 12, 13 years ago, and it was like I guess that's interesting, and but I don't know, like it I love it. I just want to say I absolutely love these two. They make it so much more interesting because most of these guys are pretty good friends with each other. They're like pals. They play with I was gonna say GBs, but like eights, and they play like different games with each other. These two just don't mess with each other, and I appreciate that, and it adds something to these matches. I'm sure you loved it as well.
No, that's what first and foremost, I think if it wasn't clear before today, it should be abundantly clear now that, at least from Draza's perspective, I'll give Scrap some credit. Like, he at least offered to give a fist bump after the winners finals the first time, right? And Draza like kind of like shouldered him, walked right past him. But at least from Draza's perspective, he just simply does not like Scrap, and they have that beef, and I think that's okay. Like, he doesn't like the guy. He's not going to bump fists with him. He's going to talk shit to him. It is what it is. Like, I did think for a moment there after the grand finals, and obviously the thing that came to mind for me too is we might have a little shove here, and it might go back to that nade shot. I didn't think we were gonna see a full on fist fight or anything like that, but it at least the notion came to mind that, oh shit, something might go down here after the grand finals. Obviously it didn't come to that. But I do think, at least from Jaza's perspective, it should be abundantly clear now. He just doesn't mess with Scrap. Jaza doesn't mess with Scrap, and he, for the rest of their careers, they are never going to team with each other. I would be very surprised if they did. There would have to be some serious, reconciliation of some sorts for that to ever happen. And I think this is like this proves that it's beyond just petty beef or trash talk, right? Like,
yeah, way past that.
The one thing that comes to mind, I think, is a decent example, because they obviously played in the grand finals today, is like Simp and Hydra last year. Like, Hydra in at Champs, I think it was in the first round, because FaZe didn't do well at Champs last year. So I think it was in the first round, like first map, Hydra dropped like 40 plus. I'm pretty sure it was on a Rio hard point. And then he's like going in game chat saying, "That's my MVP, Simp." Like, yeah, like talking shit like that. They bumped fists today. I'm pretty sure they did after that match. Like that's like good, clean trash talk. And end of the day, they're still like, I don't think Simp and Hydra hate each other. Maybe they are. Maybe they
professional rivalry.
they have a rivalry. Rivalry is a good word. Like they're two MVPs, and
Yeah.
like they're
They
going to
just
be
want to
fighting
beat
for
each
that.
other. They don't want to kill each
Exactly.
other, you know.
And they're going to be fighting for that MVP title for the rest of their careers, presumably. For at least from Jaws' perspective, again, I will say Scrap, like, he made an attempt to bump fists with him and be sportsmanlike. So we can't discredit that. And I'm not going to say Scrap absolutely hates Draza. I could, after this stuff today, maybe Scrap's just like, yeah, screw that guy. Like, I don't give a shit about him anymore. But he at least made the attempt, right? Like, from Draza's perspective, we can very clearly say he
Yeah.
doesn't give a shit about Scrap, what he
No.
thinks. He wants to beat that guy every time. He does not like him. And end of story. Like, we will probably never see them bump fists, shake hands, anything like that after matches for the rest of their careers. That's where we're at. And it creates these storylines. The CDL shows that stuff on the broadcast. They even replayed the I don't want to say I'll just say the interaction after the winners finals. They replayed that to show people that Draza didn't bump fists with Scrap before the grand finals or after map 1 or 2, maybe. Like, the CDL broadcast has this narrative now. They can feed into it and showcase it. This should be a juicy rivalry for the rest of their careers. And like you said, hopefully, I do think last year we didn't talk about it as in depth as maybe the rest of the community, but like I think we both made it pretty clear, like, bringing the girlfriends into it, talking trash about families and stuff like that, that definitely brought it to another level and took things as potentially a step too far. But that now plays a role in what we have today, where this dynamic between the two of them is just like, again, at least from Jaws' perspective, he's just like, yeah, screw that guy. I'm not dealing with him. I'm just walking past him talking shit. That's where they're at. So yeah, I'm sure there are some fans who are like, when's the cage match? Like, how the CDL going to set that up, put the two in a ring, and give them boxing gloves and see what happens? Don't think we're going to get to that point. But from a pure just trash talk perspective, like you said earlier, like, you enjoyed it. Like, I think it is weird to say, like, when there is very clearly real beef, that we like enjoyed it, because that's like raw, just that's
You just
real.
don't get it. It's unusual.
Like, I'm not comparing the CDL to my like sporting career, but I know there definitely I'm a very competitive person, and I know there have been times where I have talked shit on, like, the baseball field, the softball field, even in basketball, I remember. And there have been times, like, I just haven't bumped fists with guys. I like walk past them and talk shit, and that is what it is. Like, I've definitely done that in my life, and I'm not comparing that to the CDL. So it's just something that happens for very competitive people, or just when you don't like someone. And I think it'll be interesting to see where we go from here, but this is definitely another great installment in that rivalry. Um, but I don't want to, like, I'm having a tough time articulating how I want to
I,
say this last part, but I don't want to, like, when it's very obviously a real life situation where they're just potentially two people who don't like each other, that goes beyond like the entertaining shit talk that we say we enjoy from competitive Call of Duty.
yeah, I think the way to put it maybe is you don't want to glorify some of the things that have been said, or like necessarily
Yes.
condone, like, but I'm not, my thing is like, these are two grown men, like they are two professionals in their field, and they shouldn't say some of the things that they've said to each other just from a respect standpoint. It's gone a little too far, a little too personal.
Yeah.
But just selfishly, it's it's more fun that way, like it's more fun when guys legitimately don't like each other, because it feels real. And granted, everything is real in this. We're talking, in terms of video games, we're talking about, like, this is like a real result. There's a real difference in the amount of money that FaZe has now gotten for their team versus LAT. There's, real stakes involved in this, in esports. But it's just unusual. It's atypical to have two players legitimately, it's not just not liking each other. Like you said, like we can't really assume on one side. I think we can assume on the other. One side hates the other side, and that's a very personal thing. And I think he has every right to hate him, just from the things that have been said online and everything. And it makes it more fun. We need more of it, maybe not to the same degree or same certain details or whatever, but the rivalries are pretty fun. Even, going to last season, it was a small kind of, C-level storyline, but Abuza basically saying how can I not be rookie of the year? Like just kind of, shouting down Gwyn and just saying like, there's no way that he should be rookie of the year and I should be the rookie of the year. That made me kind of like, oh, okay. Like that's interesting. Like you usually don't hear these players kind of speak their mind about everything. And I think maybe it's a difference in like the eras that we started watching competitive and like how like non-politically correct, or maybe that's not the right word, but like the not as reserved, I guess, where guys were literally standing up at their station and yelling like 3 feet across this, not even a stage, like a little desk that they share with the other team. And that is kind of at its core what competitive Call of Duty and really what like FPS games are all about. And the best example being Killa and the Choo Choo Train and everything that happened there. I don't know if we're gonna get that. Like that feels like, unless we take away like the big stage and we put them like real close together again, and like like if there's soundproof booths, that obviously would change things. But that's pretty that's probably not gonna happen. But it would be fun. What's up to T-Bird and Isaiah Martinez in the YouTube chat? What do you guys think of the major? I mean, you can rewind to the beginning of this episode, but I think we both agree that it's one of the best majors and one of the best events in CDL history, possibly in COD Esports. Granted that spans a lot of time, but we are, we're talking about some high level stuff, and there's just no replacing having two incredible talent stacked teams playing each other and going to kind of the limit as far as like each other. We haven't really seen two teams at this level be so evenly matched like this, and these are two world championship level teams. To kind of show that you picked FaZe, I picked LAT to win this major, and I think going into the next major, they're probably going to be our two picks as well. I can't see, at least at this point right now, another team trying to crop up, but we'll definitely see. Let's talk about OpTic real quick, because we're now about 45 minutes in, and we've talked about Atlanta and LAT, and they deserve to be talked about for 40 to 45 minutes for sure. We have to dedicate some time to OpTic, who we just talked about, two championship level teams competing at their very best, kind of testing each other and testing their own limits. OpTic did not have that kind of weekend. The team that entered as the number one seed going into Major 1, they were 6-1 on a 6-match winning streak if you're just counting the major qualifiers. And then they come into winners round 1. And we talked about this exact scenario where we're like, it seems pretty simple. It seems like it'll be OpTic, LAT, Toronto, and FaZe going to winner semis. It seems pretty clean, seems pretty chalked. And Atlanta does their job, they win 3-0. Toronto does their job, they win 3-0. LAT does their job, they win 3-1. OpTic Texas plays the hometown Miami Heretics, and they lose. I don't know if it was the Florida Mutineers curse. I don't know if it was them being in Spain playing against an all-Spanish team. I don't know if it was the Vickle buff.
It was Vickle.
But OpTic Texas loses 3-2 to the Miami Heretics in a massive upset, obviously. But it pretty much derails how OpTic's first few months of the CDL season has gone now, because it really is like, what have you done for me lately? That is traditional sports and esports all in one. what have you done for me lately? OpTic did incredible. They lost the first match of their season. Then they won 6 in a row. They get the number 1 seed, including beating Toronto, who hadn't been beaten in the qualifying matches to that point. They finish it on such a high note. And then they come into the major and then they lose. They go to the loser's bracket. They win game 5 against LAG. They eliminate the Gentlemates, and then they lose to Carolina in the losers round 2. They get knocked out with a top 8 finish. And this was part of the reason I did not pick OpTic, because I was like, I don't know if I can trust them. I've seen so many OpTic teams come in with a lot of hype and a lot of talent that they have, certainly, and they showed it. They won 6 matches in a row. They're one of the most talented teams, regardless of if they have Pred or if they have Hook. But this is why I can't pick them on a regular basis. And they kind of proved it. They lose to Carolina, they lose to Miami, top 8 finish. Overall thoughts on OpTic's kind of weekend from hell, because now this just creates conversation that they didn't have before. When they won all those matches, it was like, Hook's looking great, and this is a great roster. We don't need to make any changes. Now, top 8, those conversations start to crop up. Don't you agree?
I just the biggest difference, and I think it's if you paid attention to the event, or even if you didn't watch a ton and you just look at the results from these series at the major, the most glaring, I guess it is kind of a difference, but like the biggest thing is just OpTic's hardpoint. I just went and looked, and I believe I don't know how updated the stats are for Breaking Point. They have the 3 results from the majors in here, so I'm gonna assume that it's updated with the majors. But I'm seeing a hardpoint record on here of 14-10 for OpTic, and OpTic went 1-5 in hardpoint at the major, which means they would have been 13-5 in hardpoint heading into this event, and then they go 1-5 at this major, and that has to be the biggest difference, right? Like, and it's not even losing hard points to, FaZe or LAT. Like, they lost 2 hard points to Miami, who Miami had struggles in search, notably heading into this, and game 5s, which Miami clutches up in the game 5. But that doesn't necessarily mean like Miami was a bad hardpoint team. I would have to look at the record, but I don't necessarily consider them a great hardpoint team either. So like, that is what it is. And, it's one series at that point. OpTic's 0-2 in hardpoint, dropped down to the loser bracket. Very big upset, like you said. If OpTic had taken care of business there, we would have saw OpTic versus LAT, which would have been super hype. But we don't get that. Then they drop down and play Gentlemates, like you said, and Gentlemates in general just hasn't been a super strong team this year. They've notably had their own struggles. And I know I at least brought up the point of like, that skyline hard point for Gentlemates, allowing Priestep potentially on a sub, potentially unlocking something for them there. So I know at least at some point throughout Gentlemates' struggles overall, like they definitely had they definitely weren't a great hardpoint team. Their record in all 3 modes was probably very lackluster though. Anyways, and once again, OpTic lose 2 hardpoints to Gentlemates. They're able to clutch up in the game 5 though to win that series and stay alive in the tournament. And then they go into a match against Carolina, which Carolina we had already talked about multiple times now, like at least the analyst desk and Nameless and those guys mentioning that Carolina seemed like they were struggling in hardpoint themselves after the holiday break. And we get an instance where OpTic wins its first hard point, but it's 250 to 248. It was, literally a 2-point win. I remember it being a super close map, and that's their one hard point win of the majors, a 2-point win against another team that had its own struggles in the same mode. And then Carolina eliminates them on a Hacienda hard point. They win the next 3 maps, win 3-1 to give OpTic that 1-5 record in hardpoint at the major. And I think that's just that has to, like, again, if the breaking point numbers are fully updated and everything, 13-5 in the mode heading into the event. You think of OpTic historically as an organization, and maybe not even this team in particular, but you think of the players on this team, like they're strong hardpoint. You think of slaying. You know,
Yeah, they're
one
always
in
a
five
slay
just
heavy team.
it doesn't add up, and it doesn't make sense for them to. So something obviously happened, and even there's a post match interview for Kenny. It would have had to have been after the Gentlemates match, I think, obviously, because they wouldn't have talked to them after the losses. And he even mentioned like he doesn't know what's going on in the hard points, and they got to go back and look at it. And that's when so that would have been before the Carolina match. They do win a hard point after that, but they obviously only win that one, and then they're eliminated soon after. If I look really quickly too, they would have been 0-1 in search against Carolina. They were 2-0 in search against Gentlemates. That's kind of interesting. And then they would have been 1-1, so 0-1, 1-2, 3-2 in search, so nothing really there. And then control, they won control against Miami, won the control against Gentlemates, and lost it to Carolina. So 2-1 there. So yeah, the 1-5 and hardpoint really stands out to me. And especially like I said, the just the caliber of players on that team, that's just not what you expect. And that's most notably that's gonna have to be what they look at and VOD review and try to figure out, because um, especially like I said, like those other modes, the records aren't anything crazy. So if they're able to figure out what went so wrong for them in hardpoint at this major and fix that, then OpTic should be in a good spot again moving forward. The team's got too much talent um, to not, you know, to you don't expect them to be top 8 at major one, especially like you said, they had such a strong run uh, leading up to this since the whole pred situation happened. So yeah, it comes back to hardpoint, and again, like historically for OpTic, it's usually the search. Like we've talked. You go back through.
They hate that too. They hate that reputation.
you go back to many Ego Chall podcasts, all the way back to season 1. Whenever we do it, we have talked about the OpTic organization historically, how they have slow starts at some tournaments, and that's what happens here. Like they lose day 1. That's something that has happened to previous, even the dynasty team for OpTic. It happened, and inexplicably, like it was a trend. It really didn't make sense, but it was a thing. And then they had a lot of series historically where they would win 3-1 even, and they would win 3 respawns but lose the S&D. There really has never been, at least in my mind, where a situation where an OpTic team just has had struggles in hardpoint like this to a 1-5 record. And it's not like a huge sample size. Like if this goes into the major 2 qualifiers and we're sitting here talking about like OpTic playing 7 matches in the major 2 qualifiers and having like a 1-10 hardpoint record or something like that, then yeah, I'd be super concerned. I'm only mildly concerned just because it really doesn't make sense for them to have a 1-5 record against again, if they were 1-5 in hardpoint against FaZe, LA Thieves, and I don't know who the third best hardpoint team is. I'll say Toronto, but obviously
yeah.
OpTic just beat them.
Yeah.
If they were 1-5 against like 3 super strong teams, I wouldn't even be super concerned, or I'm not super concerned as is, but I would be less concerned than them being 1-5 against Miami, Carolina, and Gentlemates. That doesn't add up to me, and that's obviously the biggest thing OpTic will have to address in this little tune-up period we got before the major 2 qualifiers. And I believe their first match of the major 2 qualifiers is against Atlanta FaZe, so that will be very interesting.
You used concern, and you were like, yeah, I'm not really concerned. I'm never really like concerned about OpTic in that sense, because this is just who they are. Like I always think of OpTic as like not inconsistent in the sense like they're going to go 500 all the time, but they could look like the best team, and then the next weekend they're like, what the hell happened to you guys? Like it doesn't make sense. This has been a trend over multiple years, multiple rosters. Like it's not the same guys, and it happens year after year after year. And it's not like they need to blow up this team or anything. They just won champs, like, I don't know, like 8 months ago or something. And
what happened before champs?
yeah, and they lost like whatever 6 matches in a row right before that. And it just doesn't make sense. It doesn't make because Atlanta does not do that. Like, that's why we almost always pick FaZe, or, you know, like, generally. That's why, like, the early start to the season was like, what the hell is happening? Because FaZe in general is like, they almost always win like 80 to 90% of their matches. Maybe they'll fall short at the major, but in general, like, they're not going to get first rounded, or they're not going to, you know, just look kind of clueless in some of these instances. And that's, you can't say that for OpTic. OpTic is one of those teams that they're kind of liable to, you know, they're susceptible to upsets, I think. And I don't know why that is, because they have a really talented team. They seem to have like good coaching, and like JP and Karma seem like they kind of have it down pat. It I just don't know what the like connection is. Like, is it really just like Dashy? Like, because he's like the hold, yeah, like, but that's really like the only thing I could think of is like he's like the only guy that's like connected to even like the OpTic like CWL roster, like, it, you know, not including Karma. But like that, it just doesn't make sense to me why this team would have the troubles it does at just kind of random points, unless they just, the practice in general, like the environment, the practice environment is just like kind of inconsistent, so it leads to inconsistent results. I'm just trying to come up with ideas for why this could be.
And I do think, you know, it being a European event and the whole long travel and um minimal practice presumably before the actual event, because like you're taking days to try and get adjusted to the new time zone and whatnot. uh Again, not to like make excuses for OpTic, but that is at least worth bringing up here. I feel that, like, you know, maybe that's one potential thing that at least comes to mind for me. Because again, like, if they were 13-5 before this 1-5 at the major, like, if they just weren't tuned up because they had a couple days where they were traveling and jet lag, whatever the case may be, maybe that's a reasonable thing to say in this case. But I do, at the end of the day, it's just something kind of perplexing, and we'll have to see how they address it.
The always the thing that people bring up is like they do too much content, and that's why they like that. I saw a tweet, and it was like a viewer, I think, had said something to that effect, and then Hex is like flexing their trophies, and it's like, I mean, they won champs whatever 8-9 months ago, and they definitely weren't expected to win champs, like, at least going into that event. I'm just always kind of perplexed by what goes on with OpTic, and that's I'm expecting them to win Major 2 now, because that's kind of the roller coaster that they'll be on.
For one thing, I don't watch a ton of OpTic content. Like,
Yeah, me
that's
neither.
not actually competitive stuff. But I don't. I mean, obviously, I'm subscribed to like OpTic on YouTube and stuff. I feel like I haven't really seen much content, like, especially from the competitive team. Like, I think they have like a show where they sit down, the four players, and like talk to each other. But I don't think it's like anything crazy. Like, it's not like they're doing it every day. Or
No,
I
that's
feel
the
like they
reason for their
did.
downfall.
So that's what I'm saying. Like, I feel like this is, you know, a pretty quiet amount of period, at least, and I could be off. But even, let's just say they were doing like a content video every single day, that's OpTic. Like, you wouldn't even be having this conversation of caring about OpTic doing content if all those like Nade Shot and Scump and all them didn't do content to begin with all those
Yeah.
years ago and make OpTic what it is today. So like there's got to be a give and take there. Like that's what OpTic is. It's not like, you know, I'm just gonna say Vegas Falcons. Like, we don't have Vegas Falcons doing a ton of content and becoming household names and being huge fan favorites. Like that's not what's happening right now. And they're, you know, like that's just what OpTic does. That's their recipe for success. And it was even, I mean, Greenwall fans don't like to think about it, but there was a stretch there for a while in the early days of, not early days, but like, you know, competitive COD, like after uh Black Ops 1, they won a couple events in Black Ops 1, and then they did an MW3 when there wasn't the
they were in Apex.
There wasn't the actual competitive MLG circuit or whatever at that time. There was like the EU tournaments and whatever. I think they obviously won the Chicago event with the nade shot push of Aches, but then they went on a spree
they went on a drought
for a while that they didn't win before outside of X Games. They didn't win like an MLG event until like the AW Dynasty run. So like, I don't know. And end of the day, like anyone saying content has something to do with that, that's just wild to me.
I think it's just like a holdover from that, like not the OpTic Dynasty, but like I don't know what would you call like the nade shot big timer Merc Scump team? Like that's like the most popular team, like from a content standpoint. Like I don't know what people call that team. Like that might be like OG kind of OpTic, but that team was doing too much content.
It wasn't the 60-50 house.
That was OpTic House. They were doing too much content, and that's probably why they weren't winning events. But they were playing Minecraft more than playing Call of Duty. So like those guys at that particular point, you could blame them for prioritizing content. I don't know if Shotzi and Dashi streaming like ranked play is really like moving the needle one way or the other, especially when they just won 6 matches in qualifiers. Like I just don't think that's a thing. But I always thought, I like to bring it up because it is funny that's kind of like anytime a Call of Duty player basically posts YouTube videos nowadays, it's like you're not focusing on playing. Like they have to be locked in on competitive 24/7. Like, and a lot of it is just like they play a game and they send it to an editor, and like that editor is kind of working on the video. Like it's really not as intensive as people like to make it out to be. Let's talk real quick about Miami, because you can't really talk about like one more thing on OpTic. You said like you're not concerned about them. I'm not really concerned about them. I think Green Wall fans will always kind of be concerned about a top 8 finish. Do you think there will be kind of a push for Pred to come back? Because before this, there's no reason. They go 6-1. They're the number 1 seed. But then one bad event. I don't think you can blame Hook for this. Like, I'm not saying you should, but he is the obvious scapegoat in this kind of scenario. As like, we kind of went with the Atlanta FaZe. Like there was the RCD slasher, like, that role was like, you are the first man out if we have to make a roster change. Hook would obviously seem like the first man out if OpTic made a roster change. Do you think there could be a push for Pred to come back into the fold now that they have disappointed on LAN?
Well, I think if you're talking about from an OpTic fan perspective, definitely there will always be OpTic fans after, like, I mean, there's probably OpTic fans for a couple years now after OpTic have had lackluster finishes, or like pick up Sim, pick up a Beezy. Like they want whoever the MVP is and the best players. They want Strap, they want Hydra, they want everyone. They want the best players, they want them on their team. So from some fans, there will probably be that conversation. There's just a lot of questions. We don't even know for sure if Pred is coming back for like this Major 2 cycle. Like we don't know if he's going to be in the US, if he's still in Australia. I think somebody said he was was it you who said it on the last podcast?
He posted like on Instagram that he was in Toronto.
Yeah, so I don't know. There's a lot of questions around what's actually going on with him. There's also questions around like how that whole, for lack of a better term, how that breakup went down. Like, is there any like internal stuff between those players and Pred that would be like, yeah, we don't want to play with him again? So there's just too many variables, and I don't really know if it's going to happen. If I was a betting man, I don't think he's going to go back to OpTic, but stranger things have happened, and I'm not going to say like I could not foresee it happening, because if OpTic announce tomorrow that Pred's back in the lineup, I'm gonna be a little shocked, not like Luka to the Lakers shocked, but I would be somewhat surprised. But end of the day, I think the whole Pred situation is very interesting. I didn't imagine us having to talk about it from an OpTic perspective, because I wouldn't have guessed them coming top 8 at Major 1. But so I do think like that door is, even if it's not totally shut in my eyes. Like it's, even if it's only like a very slight crack, it's very slightly cracked open, and the chance is there. I don't necessarily see it happening, but we'll have to wait and see.
Is Luka to the Lakers like Hydra for Slasher right now? Like that's like I'm not. That's not shade on Slasher. Like I'm saying he's Anthony Davis. Like he's a little bit older than Luka is, and obviously Slasher's older than Hydra. Slasher is a good player still, but Hydra is like not seen as the top guy in the CDL anymore, or like, you know, at various points. But like he is obviously one of the best players out there. That's what I was just trying to get at. I wasn't trying to throw shade on anybody.
No, there was, I think Breaking Point did it like was it Hydra for? I know Rule put it in my one chat.
Like Simp is like Jokic in my opinion.
It was Simp for TJ was the Breaking Point comparison for Luka for AD. I think in general, some people are like not I'm not saying they think AD is a throw-in, but I think some people are disrespecting how good of a player AD is. The one thing that is weird to me is the fact like they, you know, reportedly the Mavericks only shopped him to the Lakers, and I feel one of my other friends in my college group chat said like they missed out on the chance for like the greatest bidding war of all time, they being the Mavericks. Like if they shopped him to other teams, I wouldn't have been surprised if some team threw like a package of 10 first-round picks at the Mavericks as an offer, because I'm pretty sure, I didn't look it up after I texted him, but I'm pretty sure like Rudy Gobert got traded to the Timberwolves, I think, for 5 first-round picks.
Yeah.
And I think Mikal Bridges to the Knicks was 5 first-round picks as well. So if you're telling me Luka can't command 10 first-round picks as like at least an offer, I don't know if I'm by it, but we don't got to talk about it. I don't think our listeners care too much about our opinion on that.
I was just thinking because I was trying to think of it when the trade happened, and like I saw people on Twitter, and I was like, what is the equivalent here? And like I said, I believe Simp is Jokic. He's like definitively the best, and like they could not literally be physically any different in stature or anything. Like they just look completely different. But like in terms of impact, I think Simp and Jokic are like the 1-to-1. And then I was thinking like Luka is like at best like the second best player, and at worst like the 5th best player in the NBA. And I think Hydra is somewhere in that like he's also European, so that kind of works out. But like there's just like there is some kind of, and he was also like just the comparisons. He was a prodigy. He was like he was always kind of hyped up as like there's this kind of ridiculous kid in Europe. Like he's kind of doing weird things, and I think there's comparison. But I guess we could get off that topic. I do want to talk real quick, and you know I think something we mentioned at the beginning of the show. We will talk about these other teams as we get into other episodes as we go on, like over the next week or so, because you know they're taking a week off from CDL matches, so it's not like, you know, so time sensitive and like important that we do it like right now, like we talk about like all 12 teams. But we do plan on kind of touching base on all of these teams and giving our thoughts on like how they did at the first major. But I did want to talk about Miami because they were the surprise. Like if you look at like the top 4, you're like, okay, what happened to Miami? Like why are they there? And also being the team that, you know, not hosted it, but they were like the favorites in terms of the crowd was definitely in their corner for a lot of their matches. It's a pretty incredible run just in the sense like they beat OpTic, which was like, holy crap, what's going on? They lose to LAT. They go down to losers bracket. They win 2 matches, which I certainly was not expecting that. They beat Minnesota. They beat Carolina. 2 teams that aren't, of course, having their best seasons or certainly aren't having their best performance right now. But Minnesota did, you know, actually win 2 matches before that. And then they play LAT again and they get 3-0'd. But any thoughts on Miami in general? Obviously having the crowd in their corner and just being able to, like we've said in the past, be that team that kind of spoils the top four. When you think the top four, you're thinking that it's going to be the four best teams or what we believe to be the four best teams. And then there's the Heretics, and they're kind of the greatest beneficiaries of these CDL points. And I think it'll go a long way. So what did you think of their performance at Major 1?
Yeah, I mean, first and foremost, excuse me. I know I said it when we were talking about Atlanta and Thieves, like Thieves come in second at this tournament, and they only lose to Atlanta. Similarly for Miami here, they come in third and they only lose to the Thieves. And although both series were 3-0s, they weren't necessarily the closest series for Miami against Thieves. I mean, the first one, 250, 236 in the hard point, 6-4 in the search, and a 3-2 in the control. So first one was a little closer than the matchup in the losers finals, but nonetheless, it was an impressive showing for Miami. Where again, like they only lost to one team, and they get in third, and the one team they lost to is the team that made it to the finals and comes in second. So, in my eyes, absolutely nothing for Miami to be upset about. They have to be thrilled with this performance. Again, obviously they would have loved to hoist the trophy in front of a I don't want to say home crowd, but for lack of a better term, hometown fans. That would have been a cool moment, and I do think again, that the interview with Rancor was pretty, like the crowd got behind him and everything. Like that was kind of a pretty wholesome moment that like just showed like the support of this squad, and it kind of goes back to what we were talking about in the qualifiers and the preview show. Like if Miami didn't even get a winner's bracket opportunity, there was a world where we wouldn't have had any of that stuff to talk about, and it would have been one match in front of those fans, and that would have been cool. And then if they lost that, it's done and over with, right? So I think the fact they were able to go on this run and do it in front of a Spanish crowd that was very much rallying behind them and supportive, that was pretty cool. So I'm glad it worked out that way. From that perspective, in general, though, I think it was definitely surprising for them. Beating OpTic was very surprising. Like we kind of already, talked about that enough. But then again, they lose to LA Thieves. That's what you would probably expect. But I think that Minnesota series, we'll talk more about Minnesota at another time. Minnesota's been a pretty competitive team overall, despite numerous game fives and reverse sweep potentials. And there almost was a full sale in this Miami Minnesota series, it would have been hilarious. I was watching the Scump watch party, and Methods made a bet with Scump when it was 5-0, and Methods is like, if Minnesota full sales, Scump owed Methods 100 Twitch subs, and if Miami won, Scump gifts him 1 sub, and Scump's like, they get 2 subs and I'll do it. And they shook on it, and then as the round counts start climbing, Scump's getting more and more nervous, and it actually comes down to, I think it was a 1v1 or 1v2 in the round 11, and it was wild. Scump was freaking out. And so that was a fun moment. But so that's another situation. Like they almost, didn't go on this wild run if Minnesota pulls off that full sale. And that would be, from a S&D fanatic perspective, like I would be all over dissecting that and going crazy. But that's a 3-2 win where we talked during the qualifiers and stuff about Miami's S&D struggles online, and even they didn't have a great game 5 record at one point this year. Again, small sample size, but they showed some ice there to clutch up and then beat Carolina, which Carolina had its own situations, and there was we'll talk more about Carolina, but Vivid had like a sty situation going on with his eye, and his right eye was basically closed the first day, and it slowly looked better as the tournament went on. So the fact Carolina made it as far as they did was kind of, with that going on, was wild to me too. But nonetheless, Miami played pretty well against them, and they won some hard points. I mean, thinking about it, they win 2 hard points against Carolina. They win the 2 hard points against OpTic, and they won. They went 1-1 against Minnesota, so that would be 5-1, and then the 2 losses to Thieves and 2 3-0s would be 5-3. So nothing crazy from a hard point perspective. But then Search
They've kind of been
1-0.
Yeah, it's been a rough go, at least in game fives for them until this weekend. It was kind of a turn of fortune for them.
But yeah, long story short, I do think that, I mean, there was a lot of crazy moments, I feel like, from all of the guys on Miami, really. If I go back and think, I definitely have some in the notes, like some Real pop-offs and the slaying statistics. I know Metals had a couple of good search and destroy moments. I'm pretty I can't remember what there was something in one of the searches. Metals like popped off, I remember. But even Lucky had one map where he was like almost double. It was the Hacienda control against Carolina. He went 27-15, and I was like, that might be like his best KD of the year. And that was in a loss. So, it was in that S&D against Carolina. Metals went 15-6, and previously, in the tournament, Ghosty went 16-4 in search, which is the best search kill record of the year so far, I believe. So Metals was right behind that, and that Ghosty performance was against Miami. So Miami was involved in 2 really strong S&D performances from individuals this weekend. But yeah, long story short, awesome run from Miami that was, filled with some cool moments by individuals, the team, and the fans as a whole. Definitely wasn't expecting that. But excited to see how they, build on this, because even last year, very early on in the qualifiers in Miami Heretics' first official season after the rebrand and the full Spanish roster, etc., like they got out to that hot start in the qualifiers, and then they went on a little bit of a run where they were very inconsistent, lost a lot of matches, made roster changes that didn't work out. And it took a while for them to get back to the chemistry after adding Real to be like I'm pretty sure they got top 6 at champs. Maybe they got 4. I don't think they did. But nonetheless, they got better as the season went on. But they had a run there in the middle of the season where things didn't go great for them, and that was after a pretty hot start where I know even we talked on the podcast about being excited about, just how well they were doing when expectations were low for them coming into the CDL. I don't want to get too caught up in like the emotions of a strong run for them where they had the crowd behind them and all that stuff. But I'm excited to see how they build on this, and hope history doesn't repeat itself for like from a Miami perspective in terms of like them falling into a rut now and all that stuff. I think this team has some key players there, has some potential to build on this, but we'll have to see what they do.
Yeah, my biggest thing is they kind of progressed to the mean because they were 1-5 in game fives previously, so they had, I think, lost like all but like one of their matches or 2 of their matches in game 5 before this weekend, and then of course they win in game 5 against OpTic. They beat Minnesota in game 5, like even though they were really trying to give it away, but like I think at least that is a step in the right direction. Like even if they're just get somewhere close to 500, they can kind of float in like the 5 to 8 range for a while. Granted, that's like a lot easier said than done. But if they had continued on that trend where they're winning like 15-16% of their game fives, like they're going to be in the bottom 4 for pretty much the entire season, and that wouldn't have changed. Now they're right now in 6th, and they at least have some kind of momentum heading into the major 2 qualifiers and some kind of confidence that, it doesn't always fall apart in the second S&D in that final map. But they are sitting pretty good for a team that didn't have a ton of high expectations coming into this season and certainly this event. With this win, you put into our notes, and according to Brian's stats, Simp, Abizi, and Celium have now climbed or continued to climb in the all-time grand finals appearance list. So obviously Crimsix is at the very, very top with 51, but now you have Abizi has 27, so he's tied with Aches for 6th. Simp is now in 8th with 26, and Celium is tied with JCap in 9th. He has 23 grand finals under his belt. Pretty incredible. It's going to take years and years to catch up to some of those guys that were, pretty much touring the world, or touring at least North America, going to those events and playing. But it's pretty incredible considering we only get like 4 or 5 events every year now, and they're already, about to pass Aches. They're coming up on the OpTic Dynasty guys and Clay pretty soon, and that's pretty nuts.
Well, one thing, I'm glad you said this, because I was trying to. You said something when we were talking about OpTic that made a light go off in my head, and it's something I wanted to mention for FaZe, and I didn't get a chance to do it, but now I got it here, and it's gonna work well. That the whole narrative, even on the Scump watch party when they were doing their predictions for the grand finals, they brought it up, the whole narrative of like the Silver Surfers for FaZe, like getting to these grand finals and then coming in second place. How different this whole conversation, not only for us but the community, would have been if FaZe lost this match, even that just the round 11. Like if they lost in any fashion to LA Thieves in the grand finals after winning the winners finals, we'd be sitting here talking again about FaZe getting to the grand finals and then losing in the grand finals again. And I think that's important to bring up, just because if they did it at EWC, winning that event, you can say what you want about the event and where it counts and the CDLs, all that yada yada. But the fact they're able to get to the grand finals here, play the same team again, and get the job done in round 11 definitely is potentially a sign of like maybe they're going to get over that Silver Surfer allegation or moniker, whatever you want to say. But it is, you bring up those numbers like Abizi in 27 grand finals now, Simp in 26. They're 12-time champions, Brian Stats also tweeted. Draza is at 6. He says 3 championships for Thieves and 3 for FaZe. Only player to win a major championship in the last 4 Call of Duties. That's pretty cool. And then Celium joins the double-digit champion club at 10. So if you look at that other thing you said, so Celium would have a 10 and 13 record in grand finals. Abizi would be 12 and 15, and Simp would be 12 and 14. That's kind of wild.
Yeah, I think it's tough because, we can relate this back to traditional sports. Like LeBron gets a lot of stuff for getting to the finals and losing, and then like there are other players that have gotten to the finals fewer times but are like more successful once they get there. Like it just kind of depends on what you're trying to kind of credit, or is it more important to get there and get to a grand finals like Abizi and Simp have now done, nearly 30 times, but they've lost more than half of them. Like, is that, like, to me, like, some guys that have played just as long as them don't have, like, half of those, or, like, about half, and, like, okay, like, they've won almost as many championships. Like, that doesn't really mean anything to me. Like, I feel like, I think when we talked about this topic, we talked about it more in depth. I can't remember the episode, but we talked about it at some point about like this reputation that they have developed mostly over like the last 3 years since Cold War, because they just kind of dominated everything. I would just like, I don't think that's a bad thing. I like, obviously you want them to win. Like if you're a FaZe fan, like you want to win those grand finals, but them getting there so consistently is just a credit to how good they are. And they probably should win a few. They've definitely come really close to winning a few that they didn't in the end. But they are I mean, they're right there. So at least if you're giving yourself a shot on a Sunday, I think that's really all you can ask for, especially with how competitive the CDL is nowadays. And like there are, really competitive and really great teams that they have to play on a consistent basis.
And it's also, they're even in comparison to those other guys you mentioned, like Crim6, 51 grand finals appearances, Scump 41. They were doing those grand finals appearances when they had to, play 4 or 5 pool play matches in most cases, then go through a double elim bracket. Today, or just this weekend, FaZe and Simp and Abizi and those guys played 4 series. They had to win 3 series to get to the grand finals. Whereas some of those other events for guys on there, they played more series just in pool play than FaZe had to do to get to the finals of this event. And that's all, that's where you get to your era conversations and all that in traditional sports and all that stuff. But we don't got to dive into that.
It's just a margin of error thing where nowadays it's like you have fewer series, so you don't have to win as many, but you also, if you lose one, like that's so much more impactful than losing one series in like say 8-9 years ago. Like those guys just had so many reps, like just with the law of averages, like if you just win most of them, you're going to turn out to be pretty good. And I don't know what I would love to see what the win-loss is for like someone like Crim, because he was on so many different teams that like, did he win 50% of his 51?
Well, he's a 30-something time change. It's like 37, 38 right?
So you would have, he has like a 60-something% win percentage.
Scump is at like, if Scump's not at 30, he's at high 20s. So.
Yeah. So I mean, it's pretty crazy, especially like in this era to consistently do this. And I mean, they almost always make the major finals. It feels like FaZe, speaking of them, and they made the most of it this time. And, but again, if they, Major 2, like it's only about a month or month and a half away. If they come out of that and they get second or third, I think the reputation will kick back in. And like, what happened? Like, are they Silver Surfers again? And that's probably not fair, but that's just the reality of modern day Call of Duty. Another stat that Brian Stats brought up was total grand finals kills in CDL history. So just in the CDL. Abizi, Simp, and Celium are in the top 3. They're the only players with more than 2,000 kills in grand finals. The 4th place player is Arcides, who was on FaZe for the first few years, and he is at 1,158. So he's like half of the rest of them, and I think that just kind of shows like they do it all the time. Like they're there at least 80%. I don't know how many grand finals and technically there has been in the CDL, but they are in like a vast majority of those grand finals, and that kind of proves it in terms of just how many kills they're getting.
Yeah, I think that stat in itself is a good testament to the whole, like, regardless of the Silver Surfer allegations and whatnot, like they are obviously in a shit ton of grand finals in the CDL era because they're the kills there speak for themselves. If they weren't in almost every finals, they wouldn't have that kind of number. And in a reply to Maven, he said from Ghost to Vanguard, Crim6 had 4,320 finals kills. That doesn't even count Black Ops 2, he said. So he thinks it would be over 5,000 for Crim. So that's just nuts.
Yeah, he's kind of farming a little bit, to be honest, but and then so now we're at the standings portion where FaZe, I was trying to look it up real quick, and I forgot how many points they get for the minor. So FaZe right now is in first place in the CDL standings. It is 30. So we talked about it a few episodes ago, but winning the minor or just getting any points at the minor, that did not count toward the Major 1 qualifying point standings. However, it counted toward the end of season, like overall season CDL standings. So those 30 points are certainly helping Atlanta FaZe right now. They are in first place in the CDL right now, 170 points. They are 12-3, which is incredible because they started 0-3, and now they're 12-3 with a 40-23 map win-loss. Second place, LAT, 125 CDL points. Carolina still in third with 115 points. Toronto down to fourth, 90. OpTic Texas, fifth, 85 points. Miami Heretics, sixth with 80 points. Minnesota with 60 there in seventh. And the Boston Breach currently are in eighth place with 50 CDL points, which is pretty impressive because they got double first rounded at the major. And then, so those will be the 8 champs teams. 5-2 in the qualifiers. Yeah, they had literally their best qualifying period.
We'll talk more about Boston.
Yeah, they had a pretty normal major, all things considered. And then, so those will be the 8 teams. If champs was like tomorrow or like the regular season ended today, those 8 teams would qualify. So ninth place is the Vancouver Surge with 40 points. Cloud9 New York at 10th with 25 points. LAG or Gentlemates, they are in 11th with 20 points. And then the Vegas Falcons are in 12th with 0 points. They're 0-9 so far this season. They have won 4 maps out of 31 so far this year, which can't say it went unexpected, but we will talk about them more on one of these other episodes because they had some scrim news that I think is pretty interesting. But yes, we're teasing a lot because we are already like an hour and a half in. We have like no more time to talk about some of these teams tonight on this episode, but we are going to be back hopefully on Wednesday night. I think that's February 5th, and we can do the live show. If you want to tune in, twitch.tv/Ego Chall Podcast, or on the YouTube channel, just search up Ego Chall Podcast on YouTube. We're going to be doing a live show most likely that night on Wednesday. And then if you're just listening or listening to the podcast, or you like to watch the YouTube video after the fact, it will be there Thursday morning. But we'll talk about some more teams. I think the plan, or the general plan, is talking about more Toronto, Carolina, Minnesota, and Cloud9. There could be some differences, but we're going to talk about 4 or so teams and how they did at the major and kind of what they need maybe to change, or what needs to improve as they go into the major 2 qualifiers. And yeah, like we have I believe this next weekend is a complete dead period for CDL in terms of matches. I very much assume some roster mania stuff is happening over the next week or week and a half. So that is always something we could talk about if it happens or when it happens. But yeah, we got no matches next weekend. And then the major 2 qualifiers start up around Valentine's Day. I don't know where Thanksgiving came from. Valentine's Day is right around when major 2 qualifiers start. So we'll give our predictions on that Wednesday show before that weekend, and it should be pretty fun. Pick 'em, just to kind of wrap that up. So you went 12-6 at the major. I went 10-8. Basically, it was like I rode LAT, and that was the difference. And so those 2 rounds in SND really screwed me. I could have been I could have really made up some ground there.
Could have been tied.
Yeah. So you're 46-25 on the year. I'm 42-29, and yeah, we'll be back on Wednesday, February 5th. Make sure to like, subscribe, or follow the podcast feed wherever you're listening or watching on. We're on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, Amazon Music, and of course YouTube. I think on the last episode, like as we were recording it, we hit 200 subscribers. I know we were at 201 before we started today's episode. I don't know what the goal, like I guess the next goal was like 225, 250, but I'm not sure exactly when that'll happen or anything. We didn't set out for 200. Like we didn't set out for any goals like at any time. Like we still don't have many goals, just in general in our lives, not just talking about the podcast now. But yeah, make sure to subscribe to the YouTube channel. We're going to start, I'm going to try to do the daily YouTube videos. So if you like to get the bits and pieces of the podcast without listening to an hour and a half of us constantly talking, maybe that is a better path for you. But, or if you just want to support us and listen to our sultry voices even more than just listening to the podcast, we really appreciate that. You can follow us on Twitter at JBink with 2 Ks, at Preston Byers, and the podcast Twitter is at Ego Chall Podcast. And you can also follow Bink on Twitch, twitch.tv/JBink. That's JBINKK. have you been doing your daily race? Is that still going?
Day 24. Today should be day 25.
So there you go. We're almost at a month straight of Bink streaming, so you can follow him on Twitch. And yeah, we'll be back on Wednesday. Appreciate all of your love and support. And Bink, take it away.
Yeah, thank you guys as always for the support. I think, you know, I'll just throw it out there right now as like a probably lofty goal, but we get 300 subs on YouTube by the end of the CDL season. I'd be pretty happy. So just throw that out in the universe and see where we're at. But thank you for all the support up to this point. It means a lot. Hopefully you guys enjoyed the major this weekend, enjoyed us breaking down mostly the finals and a couple other teams, but we do have a little bit of a break here, and we'll be talking about all the rest of the teams in depth as well over the course of this next 2-week period. And kind of like Preston said, there's the potential for some roster changes to happen already. I mean, it's not out of the realm of possibility. The whole Pred thing is a potential roster change for a number of teams. Even if that doesn't happen, there's a very real chance that some of these other teams that didn't have a strong showing at Major 1 decide to make a change that doesn't even involve Pred. And we'll be here to cover all that. So hope you enjoyed. I know I did. I enjoyed the Major. And yeah, until